You've heard this before, but please only use initials. Patient privacy is important. And when you're completing your assignment, start by understanding the chief complaint. This is simply what the patient says is wrong when they come to the hospital. It might be symptoms like leaking fluid, cramping, or headache. It could also be the reason they're there for a procedure, like a repeat cesarean, a first time cesarean section for a breech baby, or to be induced for labor. Next, focus on the admitting diagnosis. This is a condition or issue that the doctor diagnoses a patient with after evaluating them. It's a medical assessment of the patient's health concern. History of present illness. When you're writing the history of present illness, think of it like you're telling a story of what happened that made the patient come to the hospital. Here's an example. Let's say there's a patient with initials AB, a 30-year-old woman who has been pregnant 4 times and has 3 children. She came in saying she's been having a lot of contractions for the last hour and her water broke. Also an hour ago, she says she's not bleeding. She can feel the baby moving well, and her husband came with her. Write it down just like that, like you're telling a story. When you're filling out the medical and surgical history section, don't leave it empty or just put NA, which means not applicable. If the patient doesn't have any medical or surgical history, then write down no medical or surgical history noted when reviewing the patient's chart, and the patient denies any medical and surgical history. This way, it's clear you check the history and also ask them about it. Please note when completing prenatal panel results, rubella is immune or non-immune. For RPR, which is important, significant in the world of OB, it's either reactive or non-reactive. All right, it's not negative or positive. Okay, now let's move on to the next one. So this here has the criteria for the social determinants of health, clearly and accurately describe the socioeconomic and psychosocial background in detail with evidence-based citations, at least 3 or more psychosocial concerns. If you're having trouble coming up with some, please reach out to me and we can maybe figure out an additional one. Erickson's developmental stage identifies and defines correct stage, so 1 stage, with examples of meeting or not meeting that stage. Use evidence-based citations. All right, and this is what you're going to see on your template: social determinants of health, and then Erickson's developmental stage. Okay. Criteria for teaching assessment and client education. Education, I can't stress enough, it's very important in nursing. In OB and postpartum especially, it's all about education. You're going to be seeing the nurses are continuously teaching mom how to care for themselves, how to care for baby. Citations are needed. List at least 3 appropriate collaborative issues or concerns. Identifies 3 interdisciplinary consults to support patient well-being with evidence-based rationale. So this could be, in the world of OB, a lactation consult, a consult with a social worker, especially if mom has a history of anxiety or depression, or maybe he's not coping, had a difficult labor and delivery and is not coping too well. Those are some examples of interdisciplinary consults. All right. Discharge planning clearly and accurately describes issues, concerns related to discharge planning. Like a ghost, looking pale like a ghost. Or is their heart racing like they just ran a marathon? These are all clues. Okay. Now on the NCLEX in normal ranges, the patient say 15 cues required, but it could be more. Okay, it can be more cues. So at least 15. All right, now we're going to move on to analyze of these cues. So analyzing the list of these cues that you recognized. So that does not mean that you're analyzing each cue like, oh, gravid 4, para 3 means she has 4 pregnancies and 3. No, that's not what it means. It means you're grouping them. You're grouping the cues. You're organizing them. Okay. So think of it like being a detective at a crime scene. Every little bit of evidence counts. But here's your crime scene. It's the patient's bedside. And the evidence is everything from their symptoms to their lab results. Your goal is to connect the dots. So let's say the patient's hot. That's a cue. Fetal heart rates is 180 on the fetal monitor. That's another cue. Spontaneous rupture of membrane for over 24 hours. That's another cue. So it's time to get organized. Group all the cues together to help you figure out what might be all the signs pointing to know about the patient's condition. Labor and an imminent delivery, meaning she's going to have her baby soon. But what if the picture's not clear? What if your cues seem to contradict each other or they just don't make sense? That's when you got to play detective again. You may need more tests or assessment to get to the bottom of it. Remember to look for patterns. These patterns can tell you a lot about what's really going on. All right, so let's show you some examples. So these are some examples of analyzed cues. So labor and delivery status. So that's some examples. So let's see what it looks like. Kind of looks like putting it all together. So the recognized cues, it's a long list. Here you see that. All right. And then the analyzed cues, you're going to group it. You're going to see what goes together. Okay. Kind of, sort of, you're going to try and group that. You're analyzing of what group of cues might possibly correlate to your hypothesis. So the hypothesis is what is going on, what needs to be addressed with a patient. So like fever, the risk of uterine rupture, the potential for uteroplacental insufficiency, acute pain. So that's the patient's problems or the risk, or okay. And then and these have to be organized in order of priority. And then to generate solutions, remember it's 4 solutions it's 4 expected outcomes, and for each expected outcome, it's 4 solutions. Okay, so here you see a little bit. So it's not going to fit all on here. So you're going to need an extra page for this one. Okay, maybe you can fit the first or the second one in there, but you're going to need an extra page, an additional page. Okay, and then the take action, that one, that's the only one you don't need the citations, right? Okay. All right. Don't be afraid to use extra pages. You can just, if it's easier, title it so that I know what, recognize cues, analyze cues, prioritize hypothesis, generate solutions, take action. You can just, insert a page there, put the recognize cues, but list it. Remember, the recognize cues is not sentences or paragraphs. You're using bullet points. Okay. Number it. All right. So remember, no paragraphs. It's organized lists, numbered, or use bullet points. Okay. This is the criteria for evaluate outcomes. Evaluate outcomes, focus on comparing the outcomes against expected outcomes. What signs point to improving, declining, or unchanged status? Ultimately, the expected outcome is a healthy mom and a healthy baby. All right, so I'm not going to read through these, but these are some examples of evaluate outcomes for an L&D patient. Okay. And then these are examples for evaluate outcome for a postpartum patient. All right, so the patient's peri-pat remained unsaturated for over an hour and no clots larger than a chicken egg were observed during my shift. The decrease in bleeding reassured the patient. The patient successfully voided on her own several times during the shift. Upon palpation, the fundus was firm, 1 finger below the level of the 30 minutes after. The journal is italicized.